In a small, dusty town where the sun was always bright and unforgiving, John, a poor mechanic, lived with his wife, Amara, and their 3 children. Their home was a humble hut made of weathered wood and corrugated iron sheets. It was a place where dreams were meant to be built, but where often, the weight of poverty crushed even the simplest of hopes. Despite the struggles, John was content in his little corner of the world. He had a skill, something that many people in the village admired. He was a mechanic, and his hands were magic when it came to fixing things that were broken. Amara, his wife, was a beautiful woman, not just in looks, but in spirit. She was the pillar of their home, caring for their children and keeping the household together. But her beauty was not just in her appearance, her heart was heavy with dreams beyond the dusty roads of their village. She longed for a life of comfort, a life where the children could attend school and live a better life than they did. She dreamt of a better life, one where she could wear beautiful clothes, live in a proper house, and be known as someone important. But with John's modest income as a mechanic, those dreams seemed distant, like stars in the night sky, close yet impossible to touch. As the days passed, Amara's dreams began to turn into frustrations. She would often gaze at the wealthy women in the village who wore colorful clothes and lived in beautiful homes, and wonder why life had to be so hard for her. She loved John, but she couldn't deny that the life she had with him wasn't what she had envisioned. Her heart yearned for more. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Amara made a decision that would change everything. It was not a decision made in haste, but rather one that had been brewing in her heart for a long time. John, exhausted from a long day's work, had fallen asleep on the rickety couch. Amara quietly got up and looked at her husband. She still loved him, but her yearning for a better life had reached its peak. She needed to go. She packed a small bag with clothes and some money she had saved over time. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start a new life. The decision to leave was not easy, but it seemed like the only way out. She whispered to her children, who were asleep in the next room, and kissed them gently on their foreheads. In the dark, her heart broke, but she was determined. She could not live in this cycle of poverty any longer. The night she left, there was no grand farewell. There were no words spoken. Only the sound of her footsteps as she walked away from the life she had built with John. Her heart was filled with sorrow, but also with a sense of freedom. She was going to find a better life for herself, for her children, and for the future. John woke up the next morning to an empty house. He had expected Amara to be there, preparing breakfast as she always did. But as he opened his eyes, he felt a strange emptiness in the air. He walked through the house, calling her name, but there was no response. The children were still asleep, oblivious to what had happened the night before. As John looked around, he noticed that Amara's things were gone, her clothes, her jewelry, even the small trinkets that she always kept by the bedside. A sense of dread began to fill his chest. He rushed outside and called her name, but there was no sign of her. He ran to the neighbors' houses, asking if they had seen her, but no one had. Panic set in. He went back to the house, his heart racing, and tried to understand what had happened. He sat on the couch, his head in his hands, as the weight of the situation began to sink in. Amara was gone. The woman he had loved for so long, the mother of his children, had left him. The pain of that realization was sharp, like a knife cutting through his chest. His mind raced with thoughts of why she had left, but no answers came. As the day wore on, John's mind kept going back to the night before. He remembered how Amara had seemed distant recently, how she had looked at the other women in the village with longing in her eyes. He had tried to make things better, to provide for her, but it seemed that nothing he did was enough. The guilt began to consume him. Was it his fault that she left? Had he failed her in some way? He had always tried to be a good husband, but maybe that wasn't enough. Maybe he was never going to be the man she needed him to be. Days turned into weeks, and John's life became a blur of searching. He asked around, but no one seemed to know where Amara had gone. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. The village, which had once felt like home, now felt like a prison to him. Everywhere he went, he was reminded of what he had lost. Meanwhile, Amara was somewhere far away, in a bustling city where the lights never went out and the streets were filled with people who spoke a language she had never known before. She had arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back and a burning desire for change. She found work in a small boutique, and within months, her life had transformed. She had a small apartment, new clothes, and for the first time in years, she felt free. But with that freedom came loneliness. There were no children to care for, no husband to argue with, and no community to rely on. She had achieved the dreams she once had, but she found that they weren't enough. The emptiness in her heart grew as she realized that the life she had left behind, the love she had once known, was irreplaceable. Amara's journey was not without its struggles, but she had found a new path, one where she could finally stand on her own and create a future for herself. Yet, no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, the memory of John and the children lingered in her heart. There was no escaping the fact that she had abandoned them. Back in the village, John struggled to keep his family together. His children, who had once been full of life, were now quiet and withdrawn. They missed their mother, though they didn't fully understand why she had left. John tried to comfort them, but his own pain was too great to mask. The days seemed longer, and the nights colder. His small mechanic shop, which once brought him a sense of pride, was now a reminder of all that he had lost. He worked tirelessly, fixing broken cars and machines, but there was no joy in his work anymore. The weight of his responsibilities was heavy, but he had no choice. He had to keep going, if only for the children. The love he had for them was the only thing that kept him going. But as the years passed, John's sorrow turned to bitterness. He had no answers, no closure. He only had questions. Why had Amara left? Did she ever love him? Did she ever care about their family? The anger inside him began to grow, and he started to resent the life he had once tried so hard to build. Many years passed before Amara finally decided to return. She had built a new life for herself, but she could never forget the family she had abandoned. The guilt had been eating away at her for years, and she couldn't live with it any longer. She needed to see her children, to make amends, to apologize. When she arrived back in the village, she found everything had changed. The house where they had once lived was gone, replaced by a new building. John's mechanic shop was now a bustling business, and the children had grown into young adults. They were no longer the innocent children she had left behind. John was still there, though. He had aged, his once strong frame now weathered by the years of hard work and pain. When Amara saw him, she hesitated. The man she had loved was still there, but there was something different about him. He was a stranger, a man who had been shaped by years of abandonment. Amara stood at the threshold of the bustling village square, her heart pounding as the familiar sights of her past came into view. She had returned to face the consequences of her decisions, to confront the family she had abandoned. The years had softened her appearance, but the weight of regret in her eyes was evident. She was no longer the young woman who had walked away in search of something better. She was a mother, a woman who had learned the hard lessons of life. She walked through the village, her steps unsure, almost as if the ground beneath her might crack open and swallow her whole. The people she passed barely recognized her, but a few old faces gave her curious glances. She had been gone for so long, and in the time that had passed, many things had changed. As Amara reached the area where John's mechanic shop used to be, she noticed a different kind of energy in the air. The once modest, humble building was now a well-established business. Cars lined the driveway, and workers scurried about, busy with their tasks. It was no longer the small shop where John had poured his heart and soul, struggling to make ends meet. It had grown, just as John had. But where was he? Her heart raced as she asked one of the workers, an older man with a weathered face. "John. You mean the mechanic? He's around the corner by the back entrance. He's been running this place for years now." "Big name in the village," the man replied, nodding in recognition. Amara's legs felt heavy as she walked around the corner. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her mind, but now that she was standing there, facing it, words seemed inadequate. Would John even recognize her? Did he still harbor the same feelings for her, or had all of it turned to bitterness and anger? She saw him then. John, standing tall by his workbench, wiping his hands with a rag. His clothes were different, no longer the humble garments of a struggling mechanic, but something more fitting for his newfound success. His once youthful face was now lined with age and hard work, and his hair had turned a patchy gray. But his eyes, those familiar, kind eyes, were still there. Amara took a deep breath and stepped forward. The moment she did, John's head snapped up. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. His expression was one of shock, followed by confusion, then a flicker of recognition. Amara opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain everything that had happened, the years of silence, the absence, the abandonment? John, on the other hand, simply stood there, staring at her. He hadn't expected this. He had tried to bury the pain, to move on, but seeing her now, standing in front of him, was like opening a wound that had never truly healed. The emotions rushed back, the hurt, the anger, and the confusion. "You left," he finally said, his voice low and strained. "After everything, you just left. And now you come back. Why?" His words were like daggers, sharp and direct. They cut through Amara, who flinched as though physically struck. She had been prepared for a confrontation, but hearing the raw pain in his voice made it harder to bear than she could have imagined. Amara's throat tightened, and she struggled to speak. She had so many things to say, but nothing seemed right. How could she make him understand that the decision to leave had not been easy, that it had haunted her every day since? How could she explain the feelings of being trapped, of suffocating under the weight of a life she had never fully chosen? I never meant to hurt you," she finally managed to say, her voice trembling. "I thought I was doing what was best, for all of us. I thought I was giving us a chance at something better. But in doing that, I lost everything I ever cared about." John's gaze softened for a brief moment, but the anger still simmered beneath the surface. "And what about us?" he asked. "What about the children? What about the life we had? Was that not worth fighting for?" Amara's heart cracked at his words. The children, her children, had grown up without her. How many birthdays had she missed? How many moments of their lives had she not been there for? It was a reality she had tried to bury, but it was impossible to ignore now. "I was selfish," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I was so focused on my own dreams that I didn't see what I was leaving behind. I thought that if I could just escape, I could create a better future. But I was wrong. I was wrong, John." John didn't speak for a long time. He simply stood there, his eyes locked on hers, searching for the truth in her words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke again. "You can't undo what's been done, Amara," he said quietly. "You can't just walk back into our lives after all this time and expect everything to be the same." The words stung, but they were true. Nothing would ever be the same again. The years of separation, the hurt, the abandonment, these were scars that time could not heal. But still, Amara stood there, hoping that, somehow, she could find a way to make it right. Amara knew that rebuilding what she had lost would be impossible, but that didn't mean she wasn't willing to try. She had to start somewhere, even if that meant starting from nothing. The first step was reconnecting with her children. She had missed their childhood, their milestones, their growth. But the gap between them had widened, and now, more than ever, it felt insurmountable. She tried reaching out to them, but they were adults now, each one with their own life, their own struggles. Her son, Kofi, had become a quiet young man, focused on his studies and his work. He had little time for the mother who had disappeared from his life when he was just a child. Her daughters, Ada and Aoife, were also adults, and they had their own lives to contend with. They were polite when they spoke to her, but there was no warmth, no connection. In the midst of all this, John and Amara continued to meet, sometimes in silence, sometimes in awkward conversation. But neither of them knew where to go from there. Could they find a way back to the love they once had? Or had the years of separation and pain built an impenetrable wall between them? For John, the emotional scars of abandonment were not easy to overcome. The thought of forgiving Amara, of letting her back into his life, seemed impossible. But deep inside, he still loved her. The question was whether love alone could heal the wounds of the past. As Amara tried to reconnect with her children, she faced a harsh truth. The bond they once shared had been broken, and it wasn't something that could be repaired overnight. Her children were angry at her, and rightfully so. They had lived without her for so long, and now, she was a stranger in their lives. Kofi, the eldest, was the hardest to reach. He had grown up with his father's tough love, learning how to survive in a world that had little sympathy for their family. He had never truly understood why his mother left, and now, as an adult, he found it hard to forgive her for abandoning him when he needed her the most. His anger was raw, and his words were harsh. "You left us. You didn't even say goodbye. How can you expect me to just forgive you?" Amara could feel the pain in his words, but she knew she couldn't undo what had been done. All she could do was apologize and hope that, one day, he would understand. The two younger children, Ada and Aoife, had different reactions. They were less angry and more confused, unsure of how to process the emotions that came with their mother's return. They had built their lives without her, and the sudden reappearance of the woman who had abandoned them stirred up memories they had long suppressed. Amara's return had stirred up the quiet waters of the past, but the more she tried to wade through the emotions, the more turbulent the current became. With every conversation, every attempt at reconciliation, she felt as though she was carrying the weight of 100 unspoken words, words of regret, apologies, and wishes that could never be fully expressed. She had left once, and now she was back, but the gap between her and her children, and especially between her and John, felt like an abyss. The children's reactions varied, but one thing was constant: their silence was louder than any words could have been. Kofi, Ada, and Aoife no longer saw her as their mother in the same way. The years had changed them, hardened them in ways that they, too, struggled to understand. Kofi was the hardest to reach. He had been the one most affected by her absence, growing up under the shadow of a father who tried his best but lacked the soft tenderness that only a mother could give. John had always been there, his hands calloused, his words few but full of wisdom. But it wasn't the same. Kofi had learned to survive without her, and now, as an adult, he carried the weight of that survival on his shoulders. When Amara tried to talk to him one evening, the conversation was stilted, awkward. He was polite but distant, a stranger in his own home. "Why did you come back, Mama?" Kofi asked, his voice cold but calm. He didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the ground. Amara felt her heart tighten. She had rehearsed what she would say 100 times, but now that the moment had arrived, the words seemed insufficient. "I came back because I'm sorry, Kofi. I never wanted to hurt you or leave you. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now that I was wrong." Kofi looked up at her, and in his eyes, Amara saw the pain, the betrayal, that had festered for years. He wanted to believe her, wanted to feel the warmth of her love again, but something inside him had hardened. "It's not that easy, Mama. You can't just show up and expect everything to be okay. You left us. You left me. And now you expect me to forget all of that?" The words hit Amara like a slap. She wanted to argue, to explain, to make him understand, but she knew there was nothing she could say that would take away the years of hurt. She had been gone for too long, and Kofi had built his life around the absence of a mother. "I know," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I'm here now, and I will do whatever it takes to make things right." But Kofi just shook his head. "I don't know if that's possible, Mama. You can't just fix everything with a few words." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Amara could feel the weight of the moment, but she knew that she had to keep trying. Even if it took years, even if it took everything in her, she had to show Kofi that she was truly sorry. Meanwhile, John was fighting his own battle, one that was just as complex, if not more so. He had spent years building a life without Amara. His mechanic shop had grown, his reputation in the village had solidified, and his children had become independent. The life he had once dreamed of had come to fruition, but the emptiness inside him had never disappeared. His heart ached for the family they could have been, for the dreams that they had once shared. But it was more than just the betrayal. It was the fact that, for years, he had been left to raise their children on his own. For years, he had watched them grow without the mother who was supposed to be there by his side. And now, Amara had returned, and everything felt like it was spinning out of control. John had always been a man of few words. He wasn't one to express his emotions openly, but Amara's absence had driven him to the brink. He had been angry for so long, angry at her for leaving, angry at himself for not being able to fix everything, angry at life for being so cruel. But now, as Amara stood before him, there was a part of him that still loved her. The question was, could he forgive her? Could he let go of the past and build something new with her? It wasn't as simple as love. There was so much more at play, so many emotions, so many years of hurt. John had built a life on his own, and he wasn't sure if he could let Amara back in. One evening, as John sat outside his shop, staring at the horizon, he found himself thinking about the past, the good times, the love they had shared, the dreams they had once built together. He remembered how they had laughed, how they had struggled together, how they had believed that nothing could tear them apart. But then, one day, Amara had simply walked away, leaving him with nothing but memories and broken promises. He closed his eyes, trying to silence the whirlwind of thoughts in his mind. He knew that if he wanted to move forward, he would have to make a choice. But was he ready to open his heart again? Could he let go of the pain and the anger, or would it consume him forever? Amara's attempt to rebuild her relationship with her children was not the only challenge she faced. The village, too, had changed. The people she once knew had moved on with their lives. They had married, had children, and built their own futures. The village had grown, and with it, the social dynamics had shifted. Amara was now a woman out of place, someone who had left, and who had returned after years of silence. At the market one afternoon, Amara ran into an old friend, Ngozi, who had once been a close confidant. Ngozi had heard about Amara's return and had come to speak to her. "You've been gone a long time, Amara," Ngozi said, her voice heavy with years of unspoken words. "You left us all behind. But I see you've come back. What do you expect now? What do you want from all of us?" Amara winced at the sharpness of Ngozi's words, but she understood. The years of absence had left wounds in more than just her family. She had abandoned not only her children and John but also the community that had once supported her. "I came back to make amends," Amara said softly. "I came back to fix what I broke." Ngozi looked at her for a long moment, her gaze cold. "Sometimes, Amara, you can't fix what's already been broken." As the weeks went by, Amara continued to face the consequences of her actions. She tried to spend time with her children, tried to make up for lost years, but it was never enough. The past loomed over them like a shadow, and no matter how much she tried, the walls between them remained high. John, too, continued to wrestle with his own demons. He was no longer the man who had once dreamed of a life with Amara. He had changed, grown into someone who could survive without her. But that didn't mean he had stopped loving her. The heart, it seemed, had a mind of its own. One night, John found himself sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. He had spent so many years angry, so many years blaming Amara for their broken family. But now, as time passed, he saw things differently. He saw the woman he had once loved, the woman who had once been his everything. And he realized that forgiveness wasn't just for her, it was for him too. As the days passed, it became increasingly clear to Amara that the road to redemption would not be easy. The children remained distant, their hearts guarded. The years of abandonment had left deep scars that couldn't simply be erased by her return. Despite her attempts, their reactions were cold, even indifferent. It was as though they were all struggling to find their bearings in a world that had shifted dramatically while they had been apart. Kofi, the eldest, was still the hardest to reach. He had grown into a quiet young man, his eyes holding more sorrow than any child should bear. His bond with Amara had long since faded, replaced by a bitter resentment he could not shake. The mother he had once adored was now a stranger, and the years of hurt had created an invisible barrier between them that no amount of apologizing could tear down. Amara understood that. She knew she couldn't simply erase the past. But every attempt to connect with her children felt like she was running into an impenetrable wall. No matter how much she tried to explain, to apologize, the hurt ran too deep. John, too, was wrestling with his own demons. He saw the same distance in his children, the same guarded hearts, and it ate at him. He had built a life for them, a life without Amara, and now that she was back, it felt as though everything was being torn apart again. He didn't know how to navigate this new reality. The man who had once been sure of his place in the world was now uncertain, unsure of how to bridge the gap between the family they once were and the fractured family they had become. One evening, John found himself standing outside, his hands in his pockets, looking at the stars. Amara had been trying to talk to him, trying to rekindle something they had once had, but it felt impossible. He wasn't the man he had been when they first met. The years of hardship had changed him, and the wounds he had carried for so long could not simply be healed by her return. As Amara approached him, she hesitated, unsure if she should even try to speak. The pain in her heart was just as raw as it had been when she first left, but now it was compounded by the weight of the distance between her and her family. "John," she said softly, her voice tentative. "Can we talk?" He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. The years of silence had left both of them searching for the right words, but neither knew what to say. John knew the pain she had caused, but he also knew that his own anger had kept him from truly understanding her. His pride, his hurt, had built walls between them that were just as strong as the walls she had built in her heart after walking away. "I don't know what you want from me, Amara," John said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "You can't just walk back into our lives and expect everything to be okay. It's not that simple." Amara looked down, her heart breaking as she realized just how much damage had been done. She had known it would be difficult, but she hadn't anticipated the depth of the pain they were both carrying. "I know," she whispered. "I know it's not that simple. But I'm trying, John. I'm trying to fix what I broke." John shook his head, frustration creeping into his voice. "You don't get it, do you? You can't fix this, Amara. You can't undo the years that have passed. You left. You left me. You left them. And now you expect everything to just go back to the way it was?" His words were like daggers, cutting deep into Amara's heart. She had known he would be angry, but the intensity of his pain was something she hadn't prepared for. It was too much to bear, the weight of the years she had lost and the family she had abandoned. "I don't expect it to go back to the way it was," she said softly. "But I hope, one day, you'll see that I never stopped loving you. I never stopped caring." John's expression softened for a moment, but it was fleeting. The wounds of the past were too fresh, too painful to heal in a single conversation. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said quietly. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Amara nodded, the tears she had been holding back now spilling over. She had heard the words, and they stung, but they were true. She had betrayed him, and no amount of apologies could change that. But still, she knew she had to try. For herself, for him, and for their children. "I understand," she whispered. "But I won't give up. I'll keep trying." While Amara struggled to rebuild her relationship with John, her focus remained on her children. They were the ones who had been most affected by her absence, and the ones who had the right to judge her the harshest. Kofi, especially, had been the child who had needed her the most. His quiet demeanor, his withdrawn nature, spoke volumes about the pain he had carried alone for so long. Amara knew that if she had any hope of healing the wounds between them, she had to go through him. He was the one who would decide if their family could ever be whole again. And if he didn't forgive her, there would be no chance of mending the rift between her and John. One afternoon, Amara found Kofi sitting by the river, the same spot where they used to sit together when he was a little boy. She approached him cautiously, not wanting to intrude on his solitude, but knowing that if she didn't speak now, she might lose the chance forever. "Kofi," she said softly, sitting down beside him. He didn't look at her, but he didn't move away either. There was a long silence, filled only by the sound of the river flowing gently beside them. "I know you're angry with me," Amara said, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I know I can't undo the past. But I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere." Kofi's eyes were fixed on the water, but Amara could feel the tension in his body. The weight of his emotions was heavy, and he was carrying a burden that he had never let go of. "You left us, Mama," he said quietly, his voice raw. "You left me. I was just a boy. I needed you." Amara's heart shattered at the words. She had heard them before, but hearing Kofi say them out loud, with the pain in his voice, made it all the more real. "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I failed you. And I can never change that. But please, Kofi, I'm asking for a chance to make it right. To show you that I can be the mother you need." For a long time, Kofi didn't say anything. Amara waited, her heart in her throat, unsure of what he would say. She had no idea if he could ever forgive her, if he would ever see past the hurt and the abandonment. Finally, he turned to her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mama," he said softly. "But I'll try. I'll try to give you a chance." The relief that flooded through Amara was almost overwhelming. She knew it wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Kofi was willing to try, and that was all she could ask for. She hugged him tightly, her tears falling freely now. It wasn't the end of the journey, but it was a step forward. And for the first time in years, Amara felt a glimmer of hope. The road to healing was long, and it was filled with obstacles that seemed insurmountable at times. But Amara never gave up. She continued to try, continued to reach out to her children, and continued to face the consequences of her past decisions. It wasn't easy. The tension between her and John remained, and the wounds of abandonment still ached. But in time, with effort and perseverance, things began to shift. Slowly, trust was rebuilt, even if it was just a small crack in the wall. And slowly, the family that had been torn apart began to find its way back together. John, too, learned to forgive. He had carried the weight of his anger for so long, but in the end, he realized that holding on to it was only hurting him. It didn't mean that everything was magically fixed, but it meant that they were both trying. In the end, Amara and John found a way to rebuild their family, piece by piece. It wasn't perfect. There were still scars, still wounds that would never fully heal. But they learned to accept that the past couldn't be undone, and the future was theirs to shape. And for the first time in years, Amara felt like she was home. As the days and months passed, Amara's relationship with her children and John continued to evolve. It was not an easy journey, and there were times when the weight of the past felt unbearable. But the family was slowly rebuilding, and with every small step, there was a glimmer of hope. The scars of the past would never fully fade, but in time, they learned to live with them, to heal, and to move forward. Amara had spent so many years believing that she could escape her past, that by walking away, she could find a better life. But in her heart, she always knew that leaving behind the ones she loved was a mistake. The years of separation, the pain of missing her children and her husband, had taught her that no material wealth, no new life, could replace the love and the bond of family. Her children had learned their own lessons in her absence. They had grown into strong, independent individuals, but their hearts had been marked by her absence. The resentment and anger were natural, but over time, they began to see the depth of their mother's regret, and they started to heal. Kofi, who had been the most hurt, was the first to give Amara a chance, and that decision set the stage for the rest of the family. Ada and Ife, though still unsure at times, began to see their mother not as the woman who abandoned them, but as a mother who had made a terrible mistake and was trying to make it right. And John, the man who had carried the heavy burden of raising their children alone, began to soften. The anger that had consumed him for so long slowly gave way to understanding. He realized that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past, it was about letting go of the pain that had kept him chained to it. Forgiveness didn't come easily, but it was the key to finding peace. As Amara sat with her family around the fire, watching her children laugh and share stories, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. It was a quiet moment, but it was a moment that marked the beginning of a new chapter for them all. The journey wasn't over, and the road ahead would still have its challenges, but they were no longer bound by the weight of the past. They had found a way to move forward together. The moral of the story is that no matter how far we run from our mistakes, they will always catch up with us. Running away from our responsibilities, our loved ones, or our past only creates a deeper void that can never truly be filled. It is only through facing the consequences of our actions, asking for forgiveness, and doing the hard work of reconciliation that we can begin to heal and rebuild what was broken. Forgiveness is not an easy thing, it takes time, effort, and a willingness to be vulnerable. But forgiveness is the foundation of healing. Whether it is forgiving others or forgiving ourselves, it is the key to finding peace. Redemption is not about erasing the past, it is about learning from it, growing from it, and using it to become a better person. The scars will always remain, but they no longer define us. We are defined by how we choose to heal and move forward. In the end, the story of Amara and her family teaches us that it's never too late to make things right. The bonds of family are strong, and though they can be broken, they can also be repaired. It is through love, forgiveness, and the courage to face the past that we find the strength to create a better future. Amara, John, and their family. The lessons learned are ones of forgiveness, redemption, and the importance of facing the consequences of our actions. The pain of the past is real, but it is never too late to rebuild what has been broken. The family may never be the same as it once was, but through understanding and effort, they find a way to move forward, together. Please subscribe to us for more beautiful story. Thanks for watching.